Hello, thank you for joining us from around the world for this webcast. This conversation today is part of a series that we've been holding talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly how tri-sector partnerships, so partnerships across the public, private, and social sector, can be brought together to drive progress toward the sustainable goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the global goals. At Pyxera Global, we believe that tri-sector partnerships are really the only way that we are going to be able to move forward at any kind of pace to be able to start to make some achievements toward these goals. So our guests today are thought leaders from the agriculture and nutrition space. I'm delighted to have with me as my first guest, Peggy Carlson. And Peggy is the Senior Director of Agriculture and Food Security at Partners of the Americas. She's got over 22 years of experience working in the agriculture and nutrition space, and she's responsible for Partners' Farmer to Farmer program and also for the Haiti Nutrition Security Program. Both of these programs are funded by USAID. And Peggy, I'd like to start with talking a little bit about the Haiti program and to hear from you about what this program looks like on the ground practically and what role partnerships play in your being able to implement the program successfully.
Great. Well, thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to see you and to talk about this topic. I'm very passionate about our Haiti Nutrition Security Program because I really feel like it's a program that makes a difference at a community level, but also involves all stakeholders. We work very closely with the Ministry of Health in Haiti. We want to make sure that any activities that we're doing align with their priorities, and yet we still make it about community empowerment. So hitting on all those levels can be a challenge in a development program, but to get health and nutrition messages down to those that need it the most, yet still ensure systematic incorporation of those messages is really what the program has been focusing on.
So tell us a little bit about how that looks. How are you able to get the Ministry of Health on board? It's really hard to develop those relationships at a national government level. How were you able to do that, and how long did it take? What kind of steps did you take to get there?
Well, that's a great question. It does take a little bit of time for that. I think part of the way we did it was that they were involved from the ground floor. We started at the very beginning incorporating people from the Ministry of Health, but also representatives and staff from public hospitals and other sectors, other people in the public sector, to get their buy-in from the beginning to ensure there was open communication. But it does take time. It didn't happen overnight. I think we have an excellent team in country in Haiti, and their connections with the ministry really helped things go smoothly. But I think getting them in at the ground floor and showing that it was a shared vision was the most important piece.
And the flip side of that question, how about getting the community involved? I mean, you're coming into a new community. How do you develop trust? How do you get people to understand and co-develop a vision with you?
Well, that program in particular uses what's called the care group model, which is groups of women from communities, and then there's mother leaders that are trained in key messages, and they take those messages back to the community. So you're really getting the information out from a community member to other community members. So I think that really builds that buy-in from at that level, and also ensures that the messages are tailored to that exact situation.
Okay, so you've got the community partnerships, you've got the public sector partnerships. What role does or can the private sector play in a program like this?
Well, I think in this program, the private sector, some of the hospitals that we work with are private hospitals, so we have public and private. And there's also a role for the public sector in helping with certain goods, like there's some feeding materials or other tools or training materials that we can leverage from the private sector. So I think there's definitely a role for all those players to make that program a success.
Yeah. And the other major program you run is the Farmer to Farmer program. And so Partners of the Americas, if I understand correctly, is responsible for that program across Latin America and the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. What does that program look like, and what's Partners of the Americas' role in it?
Well, it's a worldwide program, and as you said, Partners is the Latin America Caribbean part, but our approach really, as part of our name, is partnership. So we really do look at collaborating with public sector, private sector, communities, farmer groups, and it's a unique program because you can do technical assistance for agriculture in many ways, but this one involves U.S. volunteers coming down to do training. So it has this additional component of this people-to-people assistance, yet also it's demand-driven, so you get farmer groups and communities asking for different types of training. We link them with someone from the US that can help provide that training, and together they find solutions.
And why is that people-to-people aspect of it so important?
Well, I think it's a great aspect because it ensures a little bit of an ongoing process. these technical volunteers that travel, they get really committed. They stay involved. They build a relationship with the farmers and groups that they've worked with. They keep providing assistance, electronically, or they go back later. And so there's an additional relationship side of it. And it also helps both groups to understand more about agriculture and nutrition from the respective countries. And I think that adds a really nice component.
We first met many years ago, actually on the ground when you were working on a farmer-to-farmer project, and you had some of your volunteers supporting one of our programs in Jamaica. Can you give our audience a view of what specifically does one of those farmer-to-farmer interactions look like? What's one example from one country you've worked in?
Well, one example that's great is from Guatemala. I was just down there recently, and we're working with a group of women that do mushroom production, oyster mushrooms. And they've been doing this for many years, but they needed a little bit of additional technical assistance to really take their production to the next level. So we had multiple volunteers go down, a team, and then another volunteer to work with them on identifying what small changes can they make to improve their production, but also what they can plan for over the next year to really step things up. And it was incredible, the impact. They've made changes in their production. They're producing not just more mushrooms, but they're now producing their own mushroom spawn, which is a new product for them. So there's really a direction that they're going. And it was all because of this connection with these specialists from the US.
So let's take it a little higher level now and talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly goal number 2, which is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So big picture, how does Partners of the Americas see itself relating to that goal, and how are you incorporating that, if at all, into your daily work now that the goals have been ratified last week?
Well, I mean, I do think that does permeate everything we do in our Ag and Food Security unit, because everything is interconnected in that way. And that same global goal, although we don't work at the global policy level, is operationalized in each thing we do, because we don't work in a vacuum on anything. If we're working on an agriculture activity, we try to consider the nutrition side of it, food security, environment. So we try to take a holistic approach, and I think that feeds very nicely into that goal of ending hunger and the other parts of the goal number 2.
And what are some of the key obstacles that you face in your everyday work to drive progress toward that goal?
Well, I mean, there's so many obstacles. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I mean, I guess 2 that come to mind would be the lack of rural livelihood opportunities. I think is an incredible obstacle to not just agriculture production, but nutrition and access to nutritious foods. And then adaptation to climate change, I think, is a critical issue. And a lot of what Partners does addresses those obstacles in very local ways. Climate change obviously has a higher level and lower level adaptation, but we try to incorporate our activities to address those challenges in everything we do.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for the work you do at Partners of the Americas, and we appreciate continuing the discussion.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so you should see a slide on your screen right now for our Borderless Community. This is a new initiative of Pyxera Global that we launched earlier this year to reconnect with the thousands of folks we've worked with over the past 25 years from around the world. We're partnering with leaders from the public, private, and social sectors to design and implement solutions to some of the world's most pressing issues, from access to clean water to sustainable agriculture to early childhood education. The Borderless Community unites people that are interested in these challenges. And if you go to the website on our screen, you can sign up for the Borderless Community, receive more information, and be connected with people that care about the same issues that you do. So my next guest is Philip DeLeon. He's the Director of International Affairs and Business Development for GSI at AGCO Corporation. And AGCO is a global leader in the design and manufacture of agricultural machinery. We've gone from hearing about the work of Partners of Americas, and now we're going to turn to hear about what the private sector is doing to address goal number 2, to end hunger and increase food security around the world. So, Philip, first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here today. And let you just go ahead and start and tell us about some of the great work AGCO is doing to help to increase food security.
Thank you. Well, AGCO is a private sector company, and sometimes people wonder why private sector company would be interested. But we have the solutions that are needed. And we have, for instance, technical solutions that can address some issues like post-harvest loss. We build grain storage. We also have the technology to increase production and productivity, which is very important, because if you increase production and productivity, you don't need to use more land, which addresses the issue of deforestation. You don't have to use more water, and that water is a global issue. You don't have to use more fertilizers, which leads to pollution, etc. So at the end of the day, we're offering solutions for a sustainable agriculture, and sustainability is really the key for today.
Well, one of the things I know that you are focused on as a company is the manufacture of these agricultural machines. The problem that we know that farmers face on the ground, especially smallholding farmers, is that the actual ability to acquire that machinery. And I know that AGCO has done some really innovative things with helping farmers to be able to access the equipment they need. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in that space?
Sure, absolutely. I think one key is to try to bring the right solution to the farmers. So you need to bring cheaper solutions. So we try to cut our costs and bring something that is affordable. But even that is not enough. You need to have access to financing. So we've been working with a bank in Africa. We signed an agreement with them to work together so that farmers can go to that bank and get financing. We're also working on promoting existing programs like the DCA program at USAID, which is the Development Credit Authority program, whereby somebody who needs financing goes to the local bank, and the local bank will be supported by USAID and encouraged to lend. So we are trying to create new solutions. We're trying to use existing solutions and let them known to existing farmers. We don't always know what's in their backyard to use.
Let's go higher level for a minute here. You're a member of the President's Advisory Council on Doing Business in Africa. I know you're also on the executive board of the Corporate Council on Africa. Tell us a little bit about both of those organizations and the efforts that they're making to get American businesses to invest more in Africa, and how that's been successful and what the challenges have been.
Sure. Well, the PAC-DBIA, the President's Advisory Council on Doing Business in Africa, is a great initiative to foster greater trade engagement from the U.S. in Africa and vice versa. So we've been part of that, and we write recommendation report, and I'd like to let you know that the second recommendation report will be issued on October 14. So you can go to the PAC-DBIA website. You just do a search on the web and you will find everything there. And I think you can even listen to live session during that day, which is hosted by the Secretary of Commerce. As for the Corporate Council on Africa, it's the largest trade organization based in the US that promotes trade with Africa and in Africa. And so we've been participating in trade missions. I was recently in Zambia and Zimbabwe. We organize conferences, etc. The next one will be in Addis next year in February, from the 1st to the 4th. That will bring over 1,000 people. And I think what is key about all of this, it's bringing people together to communicate and do business. Because if you don't meet, you don't do business. And those are venues and initiatives that enable to speak the same language to achieve something together.
Right. And so bringing people together, that's wonderful. Let's talk about bringing people together across sectors.
Right.
What is AGCO doing? What is the Corporate Council on Africa doing to look at these issues around partnerships across the public, private, and social sectors?
Right. Well, we try, you can't go alone. The private sector cannot go without the help of the public sector, because the public sector will create the regulations that we need to operate successfully in country. You need the social organization, non-profit that have the expertise, the presence on the ground that we can use. So to give you an example, AGCO has partnered with CNFA, which is cultivating new I don't remember, for agriculture. I'm sorry, all the acronyms. It's in Washington, and you need a huge book of acronyms to remember. Cultivating New Frontier for Agriculture. We have a partnership with them, and we are working with them to bring cold storage solution on the ground that are off the grid. This would help, for instance, for perishables like fruits, vegetables, and other. And off the grid, because the power goes off in many countries, so it's powered by solar panels. So this is an example of how we collaborate, public sector, private sector, and non-profit. And there are many other things. I mean, we try to support organizations that do events by being speaker and promoting their mission. So there's a constant, interaction between those different groups.
Great. And you raised an interesting issue. You raised the issue of energy and the effect of lack of access to energy has on agriculture. What are some of the other key obstacles around bolstering agriculture and increasing food security besides the energy question?
Well, financing is one. I would say over-regulation or lack of regulation. Sometimes there are too many regulation. It's just a headache to operate. Lack of regulation, for instance, in many countries, farmers don't have a clear title to land. If that's their only resource, their only asset, and so if they cannot pledge it to get a loan at the bank, they'll never get any money. So there has to be some regulation. And I know the World Bank is helping some countries set up a cadastre system, land ownership system. Financing is really key. There is money in the system, but banks are afraid of lending. And, with the volatility of foreign currency, it's also a problem. So those are some of the big issues we face, but really regulation. At the end, I would say the lack of consistency in follow-up. You were talking about the global development goals, etc. I think those are great initiatives, and everybody likes to initiate programs, but nobody wants to work on it. So at the end of the day, my question is, who is working on this? Who do I reach to? Who do I call on the phone? Who do I email to work on this? And I don't know.
I agree with you 1,000%. It's a big challenge, and one of the things that we're trying to do around that space is to bring people together to actually start making progress, to formalize partnerships that are going to address specific aspects of the goals. So, last question for you before I let you go. Why are agriculture and nutrition one of the most pressing issues that face the world today? Why do we need to have so much focus on this? And
well, multiple things. The population is going to grow to 9 billion by 2050, so you need to feed them. Second, you have a growing middle class that eats more meat, and as you know, to produce 1 kilo of poultry, you need 2 to 3 kilos of grain. To produce 1 kilo of beef, you need up to 7 kilo of grain. So, and then you not only need to eat, but you also need to eat the right thing for proper nutrition. We see a problem where people are eating, but they're not eating the right thing. So I think it's not only feeding people so that they can survive, but so that they can live a normal life by having a proper nutrition. So those are the greatest challenges we're going to face with a planet that is not expanding.
Well, great. Thank you so much for being here today,
Thank
Philip.
you, David.
Really appreciate your insights.
My pleasure.
So now you should be seeing a slide on your screen for the Global Engagement Forum and broadcast. This is part of what I just referenced in the conversation with Philip, that at Pyxera Global, we're trying to bring together the people that really want to take action to drive progress toward these goals. The Global Engagement Forum is taking place on November 10th and 11th, with our global broadcast taking place on the 12th of November, which you'll be able to see on the internet around the world. On the 10th and 11th, we will be having very practical conversations and looking to find the right partnerships between the public, private, and social sector that are interested in particular aspects of the goals. So we hope you'll join us there. So my next guest is Michael Levitt. He's a senior advisor to the Center for Strategic and International Studies and is a leading expert and consultant in international economic development. More importantly, he's also my predecessor as CEO at Pyxera Global, and I've learned much of what I know from him. So delighted to have him be a guest with us today to talk about agriculture and food security. Michael, particularly, I wanted you to join us today because you and I both have a more recent interest in this question around post-harvest loss. So can you tell us a little bit about what post-harvest loss is, how that's different than food waste, and why our audience should care about post-harvest loss?
Well, post-harvest loss is a huge problem around the world, overwhelming problem in Africa. Roughly 40% of the food that's grown in Africa doesn't reach the table. In the developed countries, it's roughly 40% of the food that reaches the table doesn't get eaten and goes to waste. The loss problem is a really different problem. And because of its scale and scope, it's hugely important, but also because it's such a solvable problem, and the impact of the solutions are going to be on farmers, on consumers, on local businesses, on global businesses. So it's really worth the effort to tackle.
Well, if it's solvable, why haven't we solved it?
There's a lot of tradition, we always do it the same way at one level. There's the lack of market pull, which is going to have to be the ultimate solution. This is a big, expensive problem. And ultimately, having strong, efficient supply chains is the solution. Getting to those strong, efficient supply chains isn't the easiest thing in the world, though. It takes often big companies, medium-sized companies that see the value of investing because they're going to be able to develop products and sell those products. I've had people in big agriculture say to me, we can solve the problem of post-harvest loss, but for us, it's really a byproduct of developing efficient supply chains if we can sell our product.
So how do we get people to focus and develop those efficient supply chains? And you said it's a big, expensive problem. Who's going to pay for us to fix this problem?
Well,
who should pay for us to fix this problem?
Well, ultimately, everybody's going to have to contribute to the solution. But because of its scale, it's really going to take the companies at the back end and along the supply chains who see that they're going to make a lot of money by doing it to put the money in to solve the problem. I don't think governments have enough money. The USAID and DFID and the other organizations both lack the money and perhaps the staying power to do some of this. The local farmers need a lot of education, need a lot of help, need a lot of access to finance to make the changes at the first step. The local companies that can build their own local supply chains need a lot of information and help. But one of the big things that I think is so important, again, is that the solutions are there to be had. This is one of these problems where we really do not need to focus on lots of innovation. We need to focus on learning and replication. There's lots of good examples, usually small, but replicable. And stealing shamelessly from what somebody else is doing it and rebranding it under your own brand is a great way to do it.
Well, tell us about some of those small solutions that we know work. What's an example of something we could steal and replicate? I'm happy to steal.
Well, one of them was mentioned earlier, the idea of moving small storage units closer to the farmers. One of the big, easiest problems to explain is farmers in an area will all be growing the same product with the same seeds on the same time frame. They will all come up at the same time. And so buyers can come in when the product is most available and pay the lowest possible price. If the farmers had access to local efficient storage facilities, you could spread sales out. You could maintain the quality of the product and spread sales out. You can follow that same kind of example all along the supply chain. I'm saying this as if it's easy to do. Obviously, farmers need access to product. They need access to information. They need motivation that it's worth doing change, making change, because in the long run, we're going to sell more product, make more money, feed our families. But you can show those lessons all along the supply chain. And again, in the long run, the consumer benefits more product, better product, lower price, potentially more nutrition. And again, to go back to the beginning, if 40% of the food really is lost, just think if we solve the problem, we grow 40% more food without adding a single acre under production.
Now, you've said that really the private sector has to drive the solution to this. Without big companies behind it, you're not going to have that motivation for the farmers. But what role does the public sector have to play in this? Where do they need to come into the equation? And what role do NGOs, what role does the social sector have to play in this solution?
This is probably the model for the public-private partnerships that you have to have. Companies have to be involved. And I'm not just looking at the big global companies, national companies, regional companies, all of them are along the supply chain. It's not just the big buyers at the back end. It's not just exporters. It can be restaurants and supermarkets. So there's lots of players, but government needs to be involved. And these are two kinds of governments. The international government scene can provide lots of education and access to finance, both early risk finance and finance for perhaps some of the farmers. It can support NGOs to go in and do training. NGOs are really vital along this, both the global NGOs and the locals. They have a lot more trust. The farmers trust a lot more of them. They don't always trust the big companies. They don't always trust their host governments. But there's a lot more trust at the NGO. And again, if we're going to get farmers to change, you've got to have trust all along the way. But also creation of consistent regulations, change in rules on investment so that money is attracted into the system and through court systems protected. But the government then has to make sure that if it's going to get involved doing that kind of thing, that the benefits go to the farmers and to the local folks. That's part of the trade-off of getting involved. The NGOs have just a huge role, again, because of the trust in training and in inspiring change and trust.
Now let's talk for a second about the Sustainable Development Goals. Is there anything in goal number 2 or in the Sustainable Development Goals at all that help us to maybe push this solution to the forefront, or are we going there anyway?
Well, I think if you look at the specifics of goal 2, I can rewrite it for post-harvest loss with no trouble. Now, you can argue with some of the goals, they're so broad you could do it with everything. In this case, it's rather ideal because I can pencil in PHL solutions to each one before each comma in the second goal.
So how can we use that goal as a way to maybe get the right companies to start driving this conversation forward?
Well, lots of the companies and lots of people involved in this want to show that you can attain these goals. Some of them are pretty hard to see how we're going to get there in a reasonable amount of time. And best efforts are not enough. Again, we have the solutions in the post-harvest loss problem that would allow you to identify with that second goal and in a reasonably short period of time, show success and measurable success against those goals.
Well, that sounds like a perfect end to this conversation. Michael, thank you so much for being with us today, and thanks for educating us about post-harvest loss.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so thank you for all of our guests for joining us today and for sharing your experience. Thanks everyone who's joined us, watching us on the internet. Please continue the conversation at #PyxeraGlobal25. And please do look out for more announcements about other conversations in our series around the Sustainable Development Goals, and join us on November 10th and 11th here in Washington, D.C., or on November 12th in our broadcast wherever you are in the world. Thanks very much.